the B-29 pilot who heard his own crew break down after Hiroshima. The silence in the cockpit was broken by a sound he had never heard before, grown men weeping. Not the quiet tears of exhaustion or fear, but the raw, guttural sobs of souls that had just shattered. We were 37 minutes out from Hiroshima, flying at 328 miles per hour through clear Pacific sky. The Enola Gay's engines hummed their familiar rhythm, but everything else had changed. "Being me," he called here Bob Lewis, my copilot, mumbling the same words over and over, my God, what have we done?" His voice cracked on the third repetition. He kept my eyes fixed on the instrument panel, watching the artificial horizon line stay perfectly level while the real horizon blurred through tears he refused to acknowledge. The altimeter read 31,000 feet. The fuel gauge showed we had enough to make it home. All systems normal. Except nothing was normal anymore. Through my headset, he could hear the radio chatter from the observation planes that had followed us. Clipped, professional voices trying to describe what couldn't be described. Someone was taking photographs. Someone else was measuring radiation levels. All of it felt like watching scientists dissect something sacred. Dutch Van Kirk, our navigator, hadn't spoken since the flash. I could see him in my peripheral vision, staring at his charts as if the numbers might somehow explain what we had just witnessed. His hands were shaking so badly I couldn't hold his pencil. Tom Ferebe, the bombardier who had released Little Boy, was completely silent. He had flown dozens of missions with Tom. He was steady, professional, unsaqueable. Now he sat motionless in his station, staring at nothing. The most unnerving sound was coming from Talgane Bob Caron. He had the best view of what happened after we banked away. For the past 20 minutes, he had been describing it in a whisper that barely carried through the intercom. "It's still growing, the cloud is still growing. Jesus Christ, it's still growing." None of us knew this moment would follow us for the rest of our lives. None of us understood that what we heard in that cockpit, the sound of 11 men confronting the unthinkable, would echo in our dreams for decades. What we heard that day was the sound of humanity changing forever. And we were the ones who chanted. If you're here, stay with me until the end, because what happened next was never written in any official report. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell me where in the world you're listening from. It helps these forgotten stories stay alive. To understand how we ended up hearing the breakdown of my own crew, we need to go back. My name is Paul Tibbets, and I never intended to become the most famous pilot in history. 3 months earlier, he had been living in a world of absolute secrecy at Wendover Army Air Base in Utah. The 59th Composite Group, my group, was training for a mission we couldn't discuss, using weapons we couldn't describe, for a purpose we could barely comprehend. Every morning he woke up in the same small quarters, looked at my reflection in the same cracked mirror, and wondered if he was slowly losing my mind. The isolation was crashing. Even my wife Lucy didn't know what he was doing. When she asked, he had told me. The B-29 Superfortress was unlike any aircraft he had ever flown. These weren't ordinary bombers, they were silver-plate models, modified specifically for our classified payload. Lighter armor, reinforced bomb bays, different engines. Everything about them whispered of something unprecedented. But it wasn't the technical modifications that kept me awake at night. It was my crew. Bob Lewis had been flying B-29s longer than anyone. He was supposed to be the aircraft commander of our plane, until he was assigned to displace him for this mission. The resentment in his eyes was unmistakable, but underneath it was something else, a loyalty that ran deeper than personal feelings. He knew this was bigger than both of us. Dutch Van Kirk was the finest navigator he had ever worked with. Methodical, precise, unsaqueable. During our training runs over the Utah desert, he could find a target the size of a baseball diamond from 30,000 feet. His calculations were poetry in mathematics. Tom Ferebe was an artist with the northern bomb sight. He had watched him drop practice bombs with accuracy that defied belief. His hands were steady, his eye was perfect, his timing was flawless. When Tom said bomb away, you knew the target was gone. The rest of the crew, Parsons, Jepson, Dusenbury, Stiboric, Nelson, Chumard, and Caron, were the best at what they did. We had trained together for 11 months. We knew each other's voices, each other's habits, each other's fears. What we didn't know was what our mission would cost to us. The briefings came in fragments. Pieces of information doled out on a need-to-know basis. We knew we would carry a single bomb. We knew it was unlike anything that had ever been built. We knew that if the mission succeeded, it would end the war. What we didn't know, what we couldn't know, was that success would feel like damnation. During those final weeks at Wendover, the mood among the crew grew increasingly somber. We had stopped making jokes during training runs. We had stopped talking about home. There was a weight to our silence that pressed down on all of us like a physical presence. I remember the night before we shipped out to Tinian Island. I sat in my quarters and wrote a letter to my mother, the same woman the planet would eventually be named after. I tried to explain why I might not be able to write for a while, why I couldn't tell her where I was going or what I was doing. I ended up throwing the letter away. How do you tell your mother that you're about to change the world? Tinian Island was a factory for that. Hundreds of B-29s took off every day to rain fire on Japanese cities. The conventional bombing campaign had already killed more civilians than most people could comprehend. Tokyo, Yokohama, Kobe, Osaka, city after city reduced to a sand char. But we were different. The 59th flew alone. While other bomb groups sent formations of dozens of aircraft, we flew single planes on mysterious missions. We would drop one bomb on some remote target and return to base. The other crews called us enames. They questioned our courage. They didn't understand that we were preparing for something no one had ever done before. The final briefing came at midnight on August 5, 1945. The target, Hiroshima. Population 340,000. A city that had been mysteriously spared from the conventional bombing that had devastated so many other Japanese urban centers. Colonel Tibbets, no relation, despite the shared last name, stood at the front of the room and spoke in the kind of measured tones that military men use when they retrain to contend uncontainable. Gentlemen, he said, the weapon you will deliver tomorrow morning will have the explosive power of 20,000 tons of conventional bombs. The room was completely silent. It will end the war, he continued, and it will save hundreds of thousands of American lives. He looked around at my crew. Dutch was staring at his hands. Tom was cleaning his glasses for the third time in 10 minutes. Bob Lewis was writing something in his small notebook, the same notebook he carried on every mission. After the briefing, we walked to our aircraft in silence. The bomb was already loaded, a massive, black cylinder that filled most of the bomb bay. It didn't look like 20,000 tons of anything. It looked like a piece of industrial equipment. Captain William Deak Parsons, our weaponer, would arm it during flight. The uranium components were too dangerous to arm on the ground. If we crashed during takeoff, we would take off of Tinian Wisuese. At 2:45 de la mañana on August 6, 1945, we lifted off from Northfield. The runway lights disappeared behind us, and we climbed into a darkness that felt deeper than space. 6 hours over the Pacific Ocean. 6 hours of steady engine drone and nervous silence. 6 hours of thinking about what we were carrying in our bomb bay. The sun rose somewhere east of Japan, painting the clouds below us in shades of gold and pink that seemed obscene given our mission. Beautiful skies for beautiful destruction. At 7:30 de la mañana, our weather reconnaissance aircraft radioed that Hiroshima was clear. Primary target confirmed. I felt my hands tighten on the controls. Through the intercom, I could hear the crew making their final preparations. Dutch checking coordinates. Tom adjusting his bomb sight. Parsons completing the arming sequence. 11 men preparing to cross a line that had never been crossed before. At 31,060 feet, Hiroshima spread out below us like a map. From that altitude, it looked peaceful. Orderly. A city of nearly 350,000 people beginning their Monday morning routines. Workers heading to factories. Students walking to school. Families starting another day. None of them knew we were coming. Bomb bay doors open, Tom announced. The aircraft shuddered slightly as the doors swung wide. 10 minutes to target. My mouth was completely dry. 5 minutes to target. Through my headset, I could hear Bob Lewis breathing heavily. 2 minutes to target. Tom Ferebe's voice was steady, professional. Llave de target. IOE breach is clearly visible. 1 minute to target. The seconds stretched like hours. 30 seconds. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs. 20 seconds. 10 seconds. Bomb away. Little boy dropped away from the Enola Gay. He felt the aircraft jump upward from the sudden loss of weight and immediately banked into the sharp turn we had practiced dozens of times. 43 seconds of falling. 43 seconds of waiting. 43 seconds of the most profound silence he had ever experienced. Then the flash. The light was impossible. Brighter than a dozen suns, it filled the entire sky for a split second and burned through our closed eyelids. Even wearing dark glasses, even facing away from the target, even with our backs to the explosion, we were bathing light that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The Shockwave hit us 11 seconds later. The Enola Gay backed like a wild animal. We were 9 miles away from the explosion, but the blast wave slammed into us with no force to knock the aircraft sideways. Every instrument on the panel went crazy for a moment, needles spinning wildly before settling back to normal. And then we turned to look. Bob Caron, in the tall gun position, was the first to see it clearly. His voice came through the intercom like a prayer. Holy Moses, what a mess. The mushroom cloud was already rising to 45,000 feet, 3 miles above our altitude. It was purple and black and angry, boiling upward with a fury that seemed alive. Beneath it, where Hiroshima had been, there was nothing but a dark smudge on the earth. That's when Bob Lewis wrote in his log, "My God, what have we done?" And that's when everything fell apart. If this moment gives you chills, let me know in the comments. The breakdown didn't happen all at once. It started with small things. Dutch Van Kirk stopped giving navigation updates. Tom Ferebee removed his headset and sat motionless in the Bombardier station. Flight engineer Wyatt Dusenbury kept checking and rechecking instruments that were working perfectly. But it was Bob Lewis who broke first. 20 minutes after the explosion, as we banked for home, I heard him start to cry. Not the quiet tears of exhaustion, but deep, wrenching sobs that carried through the intercom to the entire crew. "I'm sorry," I kept saying. "I'm so sorry." I wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault. None of it was our fault. We were following orders. We were ending a war. We were saving American lives. But the words wouldn't come. Being US, tal gun Bob Caron was providing a running commentary of the destruction. The cloud is spreading out, it's covering the whole city, there's fires starting all around the edges. Jesus Christ, what did we do to those people? His voice got smaller and smaller until it was barely a whisper. Radio operator Richard Nelson was supposed to be monitoring communications, but he had taken off his headset and was staring out the window. Navigator Dick Schumer kept plotting courses we didn't need, his hands moving mechanically across his charts. Captain Parsons, the weaponeer who had armed the bomb, sat perfectly still in his station. Of all of us, he had known exactly what would happen. He had worked on the Manhattan Project for 3 years. He understood the signs, the power, the implications. He was also the only one who wasn't crying. It worked exactly as designed, he said quietly, more to himself than to the crew. 20,000 tons of TNT in a single instant. Exactly as designed. The clinical precision in his voice somehow made everything worse. He tried to focus on flying. Check altitude. Monitor fuel consumption. Maintain heading. All the technical details that could distract me from thinking about what we had just done. But he couldn't escape the sound of my own crew falling apart around me. Copilot Bob Lewis was writing frantically in his logbook, filling page after page with words he couldn't see. Later, he would learn he was writing the same thing over and over. My God, what have we done? My God, what have we done? My God, what have we done? The repetition was like a prayer, or a confession, or a desperate attempt to find meaning in the incomprehensible. Dutch Van Kirk finally spoke, 45 minutes after the explosion. "How many people do you think were down there?" Nobody answered. "How many people do you think we just killed?" The silence that followed was deafening. Tom Ferebee, who had released the bomb, hadn't said a word since bomb away. He sat in the bombardier position with his hands folded in his lap, staring at the bomb site that had delivered the story's most perfect aim. Years later, Tom would tell reporters that he never regretted the mission. That it was necessary to end the war. That he would do it again if ordered. But that day, in the minutes after Hiroshima, Tom Ferebee looked like a man who had just realized they would never sleep peacefully again. The worst part wasn't the crying or the silence or the desperate attempts to process what we had witnessed. The worst part was the gradual understanding that this moment would follow us forever. That we would never be the same men who had taken off from Tinian that morning. We had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. We had opened a door that couldn't be closed. We had become something history would remember long after our names were forgotten. 11 men in a B-29 bomber, flying home from the end of Innocence. The landing at Tinian was a circus. Hundreds of personnel lined the runway. Photographers snapped pictures. Officers shook hands and slapped backs. General Carl Spaatz pinned the Distinguished Service Cross on my chest while flashbulbs popped. Everyone was smiling except my crew. Bob Lewis stood to the side, still clutching his logbook. Dutch Van Kirk answered questions with mechanical precision, his voice completely flat. Tom Ferebee posed for photos but his eyes looked dead. The official debriefing lasted 3 hours. We sat in a sterile room and answered questions about weather conditions, aircraft performance, navigation accuracy, and bomb effectiveness. Clinical questions that reduced the destruction of an entire city to technical data points. Nobody asked how we felt. Nobody asked about the voices we heard breaking over the intercom. Nobody asked about the silences that would follow us home. After the debriefing, we were told not to discuss the mission with anyone. Not our families, not our friends, not each other. What we had experienced was classified at the highest levels of government. The silence they imposed on us became another kind of weapon. Bob Lewis went to his quarters and didn't come out for 2 days. When he finally emerged, he had torn out all the pages from his logbook and burned them. All except one page, the page where he had written, "My God, what have we done?" He kept that page for the rest of his life. Dutch Van Kirk started drinking. Not heavily, not obviously, but steadily. A few beers with dinner became half a bottle of whiskey before bed. He said it helped him sleep, but he could see in his eyes that nothing helped him sleep. Tom Ferebe requested an immediate transfer to another unit. He wanted to fly conventional bombing missions for the rest of the war. He said he needed to drop normal bombs on normal targets. He needed to remember what ordinary destruction felt like. The request was denied. 3 days later, we dropped a second atomic bomb on Nagasaki. This time, Major Charles Sweeney was the pilot, but several of our crew members flew the mission. They came back even quieter than before. On August 14, Japan announced its surrender. The war was over. We had accomplished our mission. But victory felt like defeat. He retired from the Air Force in 1966, 21 years after Hiroshima. For 2 decades, he had carried the weight of that morning, the memory of my crew's breakdown, the knowledge of what we had unleashed. People called me a hero. They said he ended the war. They said he saved hundreds of thousands of American lives that would have been lost in an invasion of Japan. Maybe they were right. Maybe the mission was necessary. Maybe we did the right thing. But that don't change what he heard in the cockpit of the Enola Gay in the minutes after Hiroshima. The sound of grown men weeping. The sound of souls breaking. The sound of humanity confronting what it had become. Bob Lewis died in 1983. In his final interview, a reporter asked if he regretted the mission. Bob was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I regret that it had to happen. I regret that the world came to a place where it had to happen. But I don't regret that we ended the war." When they cleaned out his house after the funeral, they found his old logbook page framed on his bedroom wall. "My God, what have we done?" in his own handwriting, faded but still readable after almost 40 years. Dutch Van Kirk lived until 2014, the last surviving member of the Enola Gay crew. In his final years, he spoke at schools and museums, trying to help young people understand the weight of what we had carried. "We weren't heroes," he would tell them. "We were just young men doing an impossible job in impossible circumstances. The real heroism was living with it afterward." Tom Ferebe died in 2000. He never talked publicly about the mission, never gave interviews, never attended reunions. He said the bombsight did its job, and that was all that mattered. But his wife told me that for 55 years after Hiroshima, Tom would wake up in the middle of the night and whisper the same words, "Bomb away, bomb away, bomb away." As for me, he lived to be 92 years old. He had a full career, a family, a life beyond that one morning in 1945. But he never forgot the sound of my crew breaking down in the minutes after we changed the world. People ask me if he ever regrets. The answer is complicated. He regret that the war happened. He regret that we had to build such a weapon. He regret that we had to use it. But what he regret most is the silence that followed. The years of not being able to talk about what we experienced. The decades of carrying that weight alone. Because the truth is, we didn't just drop a bomb on Hiroshima. We dropped it on ourselves too. If you want more stories told by the men who witnessed history from the sky, subscribe. Your support keeps these memories alive. Some silences never fade. I still hear theirs.